when you are really free, it's not just about free to choose, I don't know, strawberry cake or cheesecake. It means, for example, fighting for freedom. And there you don't have the same choice. Fighting for freedom means I have to sacrifice maybe my life. I have to do something, although I am afraid of it, but basically I have no choice. I couldn't live with myself if I don't do it. In politics, freedom means to act freely within the frame of existing customs and legal regulations. But there are times when to be truly free means you have to violate the sphere of what is legally permitted. And finally, while we are free to circulate in the digital universe, does this freedom not give birth to a non-transparent universe prone to manipulations? You are as free as you can imagine. You surf along the web, you do whatever you want, but the more you do it, the more you experience how manipulated and controlled you are. I will not try to provide clear answers to all these questions. I would just try to bring out the complexity of freedom. So the first empirical observation with which I want to begin is that freedom can unite us. A whole nation can be united in a struggle for freedom. It can unite us, but at the same time, each of us has in his or her head a different concrete notion of freedom. For example, a country fights against the aggression for freedom. We are all united, we shout freedom, we are ready to die for our freedom. But it's easy to see upon a closer look that each of us means something different by it. So the best example from art of this paradox is, for me, the finale of the first act of Mozart's opera Don Giovanni, where the hero, Don Giovanni, invites his guests to a big reception and greets them with triumphant opening, "Viva la libertà, long live freedom." And they all joined. They are all from different strata. Poor peasants, other noblemen, and so on. It's an emphatic moment which, as it were, stops the development of the opera. They're all transfixed. But it's clear that they don't have the same idea of freedom. Now, my point here is not simply that this is a confusion. No, such moments of emphatic identification with freedom have their own efficiency. Such freedom is not just an illusion. It's illusion with real effects. They all really fight for freedom. From my own experience, I remember how here in Slovenia, when we were under a much more modest than now in Ukraine, but nonetheless, aggression from the Yugoslav army, we were also all for freedom. But immediately after we achieved independence, it was clear that each group had its own idea of freedom. For the church, freedom was freedom to get back all our possessions, freedom to organize ourselves as a central social power. For new capitalists, it was again freedom from capitalist expansion. For new leftists, it was a different thing, and so on and so on. Be careful how in every epoch, and also within the same epoch, with different strata of or states, freedom means something different. As I already indicated, in pre-modern times, when people lived in a traditional way of life, freedom simply meant the freedom to live the way they were used to live, the freedom to follow their traditions without disturbance. In modernity, freedom became a freedom of commerce, abstract legal freedom. For socialists, freedom is the freedom that has to be guaranteed by certain social rights. Freedom is only actually possible, again, with healthcare, with guaranteeing minimal standard of living, free education, and so on and so on. And also today, the typical freedom today is the freedom of choice, which is often a false freedom, because the choices you are given are very limited. Like, it's a little bit like, yes, you have the freedom between Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola, but what if you want something more radically different? But my point here is that this is the reason that maybe the deepest ingredient of freedom is the very gap between abstract notion of freedom and concrete content of freedom. It is very good for you to experience that your concrete notion of freedom is not universal. When you become aware of this, that your concrete content of freedom, what freedom means to you, is limited, this precisely gives you the freedom to change the very contours of what freedom is for you. True freedom is precisely the freedom to change the rules under which you are free. And I think this freedom is immanent to language, human language itself. This may sound complex, but let me give you an example which I hope all of you know. Recently, in the mid-March of 2022, a video was everywhere on social media, a video clip showing a woman being arrested by the Russian police for holding up a small piece of paper that read two words, dva slova in Russian. You know, we all know what was behind it. It's prohibited to talk about war now in Russia. So, the two words were, in the mind of most of Russians, "Нет войны," no to war. This was prohibited to say. So the lady, this is freedom in language, gave just on a paper two words, literally, not no to war, but two words. It was written two words. And the irony is that the police still grabbed her and arrested her. Why? It was just two words written there. Of course, everybody knew that two words meant no to war. But of course, in the concrete situation, this meant I am for peace I'm against war, but I also protest the fact that I am prohibited to say this publicly. But you see, although she supported or didn't violate censorship, she did get the message through. That's why she was arrested. And let's not forget that this freedom is the freedom of true human language. It's the freedom to make words mean almost everything that we want. In a brief scene from a British movie from mid-80s, I think Brushed Off, there is a wonderful short scene of a guy accompanying a girl after a day to their home.
Do you want to come up for a coffee?
I don't drink coffee.
I haven't got any.
The erotic power of this brief exchange is wonderful. She makes it clear that she didn't mean coffee at all, it's an invitation to sex. It's clear. But what I want to say is that, you see, this is the incredible creative freedom of language. So, to conclude with two paradoxes. The first one is that the highest form of freedom, we have to accept this paradox, is the point when freedom coincides with necessity. Let's take a great artist. He is free in his or her creativity, but he doesn't really have a choice. His inventive spirit tells him, he, as it were, knows exactly what he has to do. So he feels totally free, but he totally follows a necessity. And isn't it the same again in love? Love, of course, has to be free, a free choice. But did you notice another paradox? That you never can give the reasons why you are in love. If I tell a lady, I like your legs and eyes, that's why I love you, it's already clear it's not love. Because then it's not freedom, it's a kind of a comparative procedures. I like your eyes, I like your legs, I like your smile. Okay, let's make a comparison, who wins? No. You fall in love for reasons, but these reasons become clear to you only after you already fall in love. And once you are in love, it's a fate, it's a necessity. Isn't this the beauty of love? That it's totally free, but at the same time, it's the most radical chain that you can imagine. But it's a free chain. My last point, to complicate things, I like to finish with bad news, is that at the same time, you know, the notion of freedom is self-contradictory. If you ask ordinary people, do you want to be free? Their answer would have been usually yes, of course. But then, if you look at it closely, you will see that the majority of people, me included, wouldn't really like to make radical choices all the time. What they want to maintain is the appearance of freedom. But discreetly, they want to be told what choice to make. They want to be told by media, experts, leaders, whoever, that's the right thing to do, and then they want to freely choose it in an appearance. So, you see, this is the paradox of freedom. Often to be free means to maintain the appearance of freedom and to choose what you feel it's necessary. This is not a bad thing. this is how our freedom actually works. Thank you. Now I will speak about our freedom to change the past. Of course, from a scientific standpoint, the notion of changing the past is a nonsense. What happens, happens. Science described it. And even science at its most radical, science which, like quantum mechanics, introduces contingency into nature itself, so that nature is not fully determined by necessity, there is no space for freedom there, because freedom doesn't mean contingency. Freedom means a determinism, but a determinism of your own. Freedom means to freely choose, determine something. Like if you grab a piece of candy by chance, this is not freedom, this is contingency. But my thesis will be that nonetheless, we can freely change the past. The problem is only in what precise sense. Of course, from the scientific standpoint, freedom is ultimately what they call in cognitive sciences a user's illusion. You think that you act freely, which simply means you do what you want or what you intend, but the content is already determined by society or by neuronal processes in you. And there is even a well-known scientific experiment done already, I think, almost half a century ago by Benjamin Libet, where he scientifically, for some people, demonstrates that there is no freedom. He asked people to do something in a totally contingent-free way. He had measuring apparatuses connected with your neurons, and he demonstrated that a split of a second before you decide, commands from your brain were already on the way to your hand. So when you made a free decision, you just registered something that was already going on. But does this cancel freedom? Libet's answer is very interesting. He claims, yes, the content of decision is predetermined by neuronal processes. But you can say no. You sabotage the decision. And that is your freedom. Your primordial form of freedom is to say no, to stop it. Then there are other attempts to save freedom. The classical one is to differentiate between many levels of reality. They claim, of course, at the elementary level of atomic interaction and so on, there is no freedom. But then nature organizes itself into animal life, human mind, and there at a higher level, there is a space for freedom. Of course, naturalist scientists would have said this is just an illusion. In reality, there is no freedom. But what I want to prove today is that in the specifically symbolic universe, the universe of human spirit, of our symbolic language interaction, there is a space for freedom. So let me introduce this dimension with a quote from one of my favorite poets. What happens when a new work of art is created is something that happens simultaneously to all the works of art which preceded it. What does this mean? Let me take the example of Shakespeare's Hamlet. I think it is wrong to read Hamlet as a great work of art which contains in itself an incredible depth, all possible variations, and so on. It's much more productive to read a great classical work of art as something unfinished in itself. Shakespeare didn't know what he is saying. Just deep thoughts came to him. He wasn't even aware what they can mean. I think that now we can know better than Shakespeare what is in Shakespeare. Great works of art are retroactively recreated all the time. The best cinema version of Hamlet, I think, is the one by the Japanese director Akira Kurosawa from early 60s, which transposes Hamlet into modern Japan, where Hamlet is a Japanese student. He returns there from United States, from the studies, and then the same story as in Hamlet. His father, the owner of a big company, is murdered, and so on and so on. But you see, this is the mystery of changing the past. After seeing this version, of course, we transpose Hamlet in a different context. The situation is totally different. But in a way, we fill in the gaps which were already there in the original. This retroactivity is crucial. Let me give you here a wonderful example, which is the favorite one, which scientifically is madness. But I think it's the best theory of ideology that I can imagine. You know, when Charles Darwin proposed his theory of evolution, one of his friends, who was a conservative theologist, saw the truth in Darwin. Yes, fossils prove that universe lasted for millions of years, that there was life on Earth before humanity, and so on. But he nonetheless, this guy, believed that the Bible is literally true. And if you count years in the Bible, our universe should have been created a little bit over 4,000 years ago. So how does this guy propose to bring together Darwinism and theology? An ingenious solution. God directly created fossils in the same way that in a movie scene you have painted background to create a false temporal opening. You know, God created the illusion of the past. Now this, of course, is scientifically nonsense, but I think it is true literally as a theory of ideology. Ideology means that every historical epoch perceives the past in a different way. Here I would like to take an example from politics. It's my favorite example. When in 1993 in Geneva there were negotiations about how to end the Korean War, the Chinese Prime Minister Zhou Enlai, who represented China there, was asked by a French journalist, what does he think about French Revolution? And he gave a wonderful answer. His answer was, it's too early to say. We don't yet know what was the French Revolution. And he was right, because when communist socialism disintegrated, incidentally, you remember, exactly 200 years after French Revolution. French Revolution became the beginning of an epoch, revolutionary epoch of progress, which ended in 1990. And so now, when we are fighting for freedom, we are still fighting for what the French Revolution is or was. The reality is the same. People were dying there and so on and so on. The reality is the same, but the symbolic weight of this reality changes. Let me go here even a step further and give another example from cinema which makes this clear. In the Hollywood director, who was, of course, an immigrant from Germany, Ernst Lubitsch, in his film Ninotchka, there is a wonderful joke mentioned there. The hero of the film visits a cafeteria and orders coffee, but he says, coffee without cream, please. And the waiter answers, sorry, I cannot give you coffee without cream because we ran out of cream. But we have milk, so I can only give you coffee without milk. Now, you see the paradox. We have the same, in any case, the guest will get, we have a cup of pure black coffee. But if you order just plain coffee, this can be coffee, plain coffee, this can be coffee without cream, and this can be coffee without milk. It's physically the same, but in its symbolic impact, it's not the same. How? Why not? Let me give you a political example. The first step of feminism is always like my coffee is coffee without milk. In the sense of, in a traditional society, a woman who is trained to identify with her traditional position in a patriarchal society, a woman simply accepts her position. It's natural for me to work at home, to obey husband, and so on, to be a good wife. Feminism begins when you say, I don't want just to be coffee, I experience my position as coffee without milk. That is to say, there is something which I should have, would like to have, but is not there. And the difference between multiple versions of feminism is how do you define this dimension that is missing? For predominant American Me Too feminism, unfortunately, what the woman is missing is identified in typically upper middle class term. More manager positions, less violations of women's rights, and so on. In Korea, I noticed what women were demanding was much more deeply located in everyday life. Something unimaginable in the United States happened. Women protested for multiple forms of being abused by men. There were big demonstrations against this horrible fashion of men displaying on the web naked photos of their girlfriends and so on and so on. So again, more radical feminists say, no, we are not women without milk, without legal equality. We want more. We are women without cream. Cream means actual social power, responsibility, better jobs, and so on and so on. And this is what today's feminism, conflicts in feminism are about. They are about the struggle of what women are without today. You, as a feminist, again, feel deprived of things. But what are you deprived of? It's not enough legal equality. You want social power and so on. You want much more. In this sense, we can change the past. The past remains the same. Women were exploited, all that stuff. But what the women were deprived of, so what they demand now, this is open to interpretation. The general lesson, just to conclude, is that the limit, I think, of scientific determinism is that it gets involved in what philosophers call pragmatic contradiction, which means at the level of the object that you analyze, you as a scientist can say, we don't have free will, we are totally determined by natural laws and so on. But scientists argue with arguments for that. They try to convince each other, which means that although they claim there is no free will, in their very scientific debate, they act as if they are free beings. If you are dealing with a person without freedom, you wouldn't argue with that person. Because argumentation means, I think you are free to decide, you listen to arguments, and I will try to convince you. So this is a good philosophical point against natural determinism. Yes, you may be right at the level of content. You give a correct description of our biological reality. But the way we do it implies freedom. You act as free beings. Here, again, even the hardest science displays in how it proceeds freedom. I will talk now about a crucial distinction, I think, politically, between freedom and liberty. Unfortunately, it works only in English. In French, it's liberté, liberty. In German, it's Freiheit, freedom. But I think the distinction between freedom and liberty is very useful. Let me begin with another paradox of freedom. Sometimes the awareness of freedom, the awareness that I have a free choice, is precisely what prevents me from getting free of something. It guarantees that I will not change. The example here, of course, I didn't make a scientific experiment, but I checked with all of my friends, is smoking. Many smokers want to stop smoking. But you know which is the logic of excusing yourself to go on smoking. You tell to yourself, not a problem, I'm free. Anytime I can stop smoking. And you use this as an excuse never to stop smoking. You tell yourself, okay, no problem, I will stop tomorrow at any point I have the chance to stop. So you de facto never stop smoking. And my good friend Alenka Zupancic, a Slovene philosopher, proposed here a wonderful experiment. Let's say you are such a smoker who said, I'm a free being, I can smoke at any point and I can stop at any point that I want, so you use this awareness of a choice never to stop smoking. Alenka Zupancic said, but imagine a situation where somebody would make a choice more radical. Somebody, an authority, would tell you, yes, you are free to choose between smoking and not smoking, but the choice you make will oblige you to the end. That is to say, if you choose going on smoking, you will never be allowed to go back to non-smoking, and vice versa. That would be the real choice. Then you would really have to decide. And I think true freedom would be this more difficult situation, where you don't have the excuse, okay, I will decide tomorrow. You have to take the big decision now, with no chance of undoing it later. This is what happens in wars for freedom, like in Ukraine today. They're not just saying we are doing this today, tomorrow we have another choice. No, their choice is now. They have to decide now forever. Here enters the difference between liberty and freedom. This difference, I think, refers to what the German philosopher Hegel defined as the difference between abstract and concrete freedom. What we mean in our daily language as freedom is what Hegel calls concrete freedom, which means freedom whose contours are determined by the existing space of not only explicit regulations and rules, but especially, even more, unwritten rules. For example, that's why I, in a position which is very problematic for some, that's why I was absolutely for obligatory vaccination. Because, of course, in some abstract sense, you were not free if the state says you must get vaccinated. But a good argument for vaccination is for me that by not getting vaccinated, you limit everyday freedom of other people. You expose them to danger and so on and so on. We are only free within a certain scope of rules. For example, let's say I'm free at the most stupid level. I'm free to go into the city, to walk around, to buy things, whatever. This presupposes that I can expect other people to follow certain rules of decency, that they will not beat me, attack me. This presupposes that everybody recognizes money. And I have normal space of social interaction. Even more important here is that to enjoy this concrete social freedom, I have to obey unwritten rules. Written rules are not enough. I think our freedom only works if me and people around me support, sustain, again, unwritten rules. What do I mean by this? One beautiful example, and there are many others, here in Europe, especially, at least in my own country, is that you have a strange phenomenon of what I called false free choice. For example, let's say that I have more money than you, and I invite you out to dinner. It's clear to both of us that I will pay. But there is a ritual in my country that when the bill arrives, you, my guest, you have to pretend, oh, let us split, let me pay, and so on. It's pure politeness. The worst thing I can do to you is to say, okay, then you pay. I mean, you know, and this is what human culture is. You make an empty offer, we both know that I will pay, but to assert our link and friendship, we have to go through this. So again, an even more radical example is language. We are only free within a language. To think freely means to totally obey the rules of language. Otherwise, you cannot even think. So this is, again, concrete freedom. Here I am radically on the left. The left is right to point out that to be free, a whole set of conditions have to be established. Like, to be free, you have to have some kind of a social health care, social welfare, and so on. Without all this, you are formally free, but in reality, you are in total danger, in constant anxiety, and so on, and so on. So this is concrete freedom. Hegel was aware of them, where liberty as concrete freedom, liberty to live the way you want within a social order, that liberty falls apart and you need the more radical freedom to act outside the contours of liberty, as in a situation of social revolt, revolution, war, and so on. Jean-Paul Sartre, the French existentialist, put this in a wonderful way in a text that he wrote at the end of 1944, after France was liberated. Sartre wrote, "Never were we, French people, more free than under the German occupation. We had lost all our rights, and first of all, our right to speak. They, the Germans, insulted us to our faces. And that is why the resistance was a true democracy. For the soldier, as was here superior, the same danger, the same loneliness." So the situation Sartre is describing, it's not of liberty. You were totally controlled by the German, people were liquidated, tortured, abducted, and so on. But in some sense, they were radically free. They had to make the radical choice, risk everything, fight for freedom. And I think the same holds now for Ukraine. They are certainly not living in liberty. Even in the parts which are not yet occupied by the Russian army, they have to obey certain discipline and so on. But since their way of life is at stake, they have to decide radically to choose a side, to fight for their way of life. And this is freedom. Now I come to our today's situation. I think something very strange is happening now. More and more people think that they have to practice radical freedom, which means violating social rules and so on, to retain their liberty. The distinction is no longer clear. What do I mean by this? Think about the attack on Capitol on the 6th of January last year, 2021, when the mob of Trump supporters did something which was an act of freedom. They violated the rules of liberty, of social order. They occupied the Capitol. So they think that the only way to retain their liberty is to exercise freedom. I think that we, humanity, not just the developed world, are entering a new era in which liberal capitalism, as we knew it, is coming to an end. What it is replaced with is what some people call corporate neo-feudalism. It's a problematic term, but there is some truth in it. There is at least one thing about this neo-feudalism that is well known. You remember, now it's already half a year ago, when Mark Zuckerberg announced Metaversum. What he proposes is a new social space where we all can communicate, do all the exchanges from dating to business and so on. It's literally a metaverse, no longer our material, vulgar universe, but a virtual space where we are free to play with our identities and so on and so on. But he forgot to add something, that this universe within which we cooperate is privately owned. This is feudalism, and this is neo-feudalism, that the new masters are no longer capitalists who just take the profit, exploit us as common workers. I think we are returning more and more to a period of rent. How did Bill Gates become so wealthy? It's not that he exploits his workers and so on. No, he occupies an almost universal monopoly position. So in order for us to go on with our daily business, collaborating with each other, we pay him a rent by subscribing to Microsoft, one of his programs, by using his software, and so on and so on. So what Marx called commons, the common space within which we interact, gets privatized. And I think the other side of this neo-feudalism is something almost more horrible, I would have said, which is the more and more important role of precarious work. What's the trick of precarious work? It is that you get a false freedom in precarious work, no? Like, look at an Uber driver. He owns his own means of production, he can work whenever he wants, and so on. And although he never can be sure will it last, his work, and so on, he, in a way, acts as an entrepreneur on his or her own. So the paradox is that while he experiences his life as more free than ever, you just work when you want, and so on, his subordination to the existing order is much more total than at any point before. So the great danger today, I think, is not the traditional domination, where, you know, my master is out there, The most dangerous form of unfreedom today is the unfreedom that you experience as freedom. And I think the latest, most dangerous form of this is cryptocurrencies. The idea of cryptocurrencies was, of course, anarchic freedom. We can make money which will not be dependent on any state institutions. It's like direct, transparent exchange. The result of it is total impenetrability. We are more manipulated than ever, and even the very structure of manipulation is not transparent. So this is our predicament today. I almost have a longing for the good old times, which persist up to a point in China, where you know you are not free. My friends from China who are under observation, police tell me, you know you're observed, you look back, there is a secret policeman behind or whatever. But what about something much more horrible? You freely run around on the web, you are totally free, you buy what you want, etc. But you are totally denominated, your freedom is regulated. That's the danger today. And now I will talk about the impotence of knowledge. How knowing what the situation is can even prevent us from acting, from doing something. If you just follow the media, I'm sure you have noticed a strange thing. We are all the time told what our situation is and what is wrong. There was a conference half a year ago in Glasgow about the dangers of global warming, where all the right things were said. We need global cooperation, we need to change our entire way of life to cope with global catastrophe, and so on. But these were just words. They adopted some empty rhetorical measures, but nothing really changed. So we live in a strange time where we know what is wrong, pandemic, global warming, now the war. We know even vaguely what has to be done, but although we talk a lot of time about it, we are unable to act. Why? We cannot act precisely because we are hyperactive all the time. Look at our daily life in today's global capitalism. All the time, you have to be active, intervene, participate in something, and so on and so on. But in order to properly act, to change things, you have to step back a little bit, to acquire a minimal distance. This, we cannot do it. The system never leaves us alone. It's something that I know very well, because in psychoanalysis, we call it obsessional neurosis. And I know what I'm talking about because I think I'm one of them. An obsessional neurotic is active, talks all the time, but not in order to achieve something, but in order to make it sure that nothing will really change. And I'm sometimes like that. I talk all the time. Why? Because I am afraid that if for a short minute I stop talking, you will maybe notice the vacuity of what I'm saying and ask me a real question. So you see the paradox. Being hyperactive is a way to make it sure that nothing will really change. You know who knew this clearly? George Orwell. He wrote already back in 1937 that progressive radical leftists talk all the time about how necessary it is to change society, but he said they talk all the time about it, but with the secret wish that nothing will really change. This is also why I think many public intellectuals today like to spread total pessimism, like we are already 5 minutes past 12, we are doomed. It means I'm in a comfortable position of knowing that everything points towards a catastrophe. I don't have to act, to do anything. In psychoanalysis, we call this cynical reason, or in technical terms, fetishism. We know what the situation is, but instead of making us act, talking is here as an excuse not to do anything. If some of people viewing this show are in any way involved in art exhibitions, art biennales, they know what I'm talking about. If there is a form of art which is fully integrated into capitalist circulation, are these big art biennales. Venice, Kassel, and so on. And their ideology is strictly radically leftist. You have endless debates about how to fight global capitalism, how we are all manipulated by big capital, but they fit perfectly the global capital. The formula of cynical reason was proposed half a century ago by German philosopher Peter Sloterdijk, who said, people know what they are doing, horrors, dangers about what they are doing, but they are nonetheless doing it. Did you already encounter a person who is properly cynical like this? I did when I was young in communist times. At my department of philosophy, there was a very cynical, corrupted professor who openly told us students, I know I'm a piece of shit. I cheat, I inform to police, but that's it. What can I do? I'm like that. You know where he was cheating? He thought that if he says this openly, if it in some way redeems him, it makes him better. No, it doesn't. The formula that applies here is the wonderful formula, a joke from one of the Marx Brothers movies. I think it's duck soup, but I'm not sure. Where Groucho Marx, a lawyer in the movie, defending an idiot, says, this man looks as an idiot and acts as an idiot, but this shouldn't deceive you, this man really is an idiot.
He really is an idiot. I implore you.
That's how we function today, unfortunately. Again, we live in an era of cynical reasoning where telling the truth is not enough. You can say the truth, but it's immediately incorporated. There is a film, which is not a great film, but nonetheless, it demonstrates this aspect of our predicament perfectly. It is Adam McKay's Don't Look Up, about, a comet approaching the Earth, threatening to destroy all life on the Earth. And the target of the film are not some kind of Donald Trump-like populists, but precisely the democratic establishment and protesters who warn we are all in danger, look up, and they just make the spectacle out of the danger, but they don't do anything really. Life goes on as normal, and this is, I think, this is our problem today. Knowledge is not enough. What we need is truth. Truth is not simply knowledge. Truth is knowledge which subjectively engages you. And today we know everything, but we don't really subjectively assume this knowledge. That's why I think today, more than ever, we need to distinguish between knowledge and truth. Again, knowledge is objective knowledge, but it doesn't oblige you to anything. We don't need just science telling us how things are. We need knowledge which is engaged knowledge. This is why I hate, although they do some good work, I hate the logic of charity, which is part of the big corporate capitalism today. Charity, I think, helps reproducing the very situation which it pretends to fight. What do I mean by this? Allow me to read you a quote, the beginning of Oscar Wilde's excellent essay, The Soul of Man Under Socialism, which tells it all. Oscar Wilde claims that, quote, indeed, their remedies, charity and so on, are part of the disease. The proper aim is to try and reconstruct society on such a basis that poverty will be impossible. It is immoral to use private property in order to alleviate the horrible evils that result from the institution of private property. This last sentence, I think, provides a nice formula of what is wrong with, for example, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Bill Gates, first, in a very brutal capitalist tactic, amasses enormous amount of money and then gives part of it back. I think that we should attack also Bill Gates' vacuous pan-humanitarianism. The answer to Bill Gates should be the title of a book published by an Austrian friend of mine, Sama Naami. The title of the book is Refusal of Respect. Why we should not respect foreign cultures and our own also not. I think this multicultural formula of all cultures are worth of respect and so on is totally deceiving and false. No, behind every culture there is a barbarism. So the solution is not respect other cultures but despise your own. It's also not, of course, the racist formula of only our culture is great one, despise others. No. We should be universal in the sense of sharing what is wrong, connecting what is wrong in our culture with what is wrong in other culture. That's why, I will go to the end here, it may shock you. The citizens of a developed country who thinks that most that he can do is to open his land to immigrants, is in a way wrong. No, I'm not saying that I'm against immigrants, but I'm saying that already to formulate the problem in this way, as if the big dilemma is open our limits to immigrants or not, is to accept the basic mystification, to confront the true problem. But why are there immigrants? We should fight to change the social order which makes some people immigrants. Humanitarianism, again, is not enough. And especially, to go even more to the end, pacifism is not enough. It's horrible to say this apropos Ukrainian war, but I really despise all those who are saying these days, we need peace and so on. Are we aware that peace, the desire for peace, is always the desire of occupiers? Israel doesn't want anything more than peace on the West Bank. Peace means you firmly have under your hand the terrain that you occupied. And I'm totally convinced that Russia now wants peace in Ukraine. Peace means we occupy it. We have the firm hold over it. No, we live in a crazy time where wars are no longer the old wars between nation states, but they are really, in some sense, peacekeeping interventions. So we need a total mobilization against this type of false peace. To conclude, I want to destroy another of your, maybe, illusions, which is, yes, we have to step out of these political manipulations and so on. We need poets and thinkers. No, they're the worst. I hope to shock you here a little bit. My formula is no ethnic cleansing without poetry. You know, most of us, we are relatively decent people. And take any of you, since you are probably normally human and me also, if I were to kill you, obliged to kill you, it would be very difficult for me. I see you in your eye, I see you are another human being. I cannot do it. And here, poetry and thinking or religion, some high ideology enters. As Steven Weinberg, the well-known quantum cosmologist, said, he said, without religion, good people would have been good people and bad people would have been bad people, but we need something like religion to make good people do bad things. I'm speaking here from my own experience, the horrible civil war in ex-Yugoslavia, where we can clearly see how the war was grounded decades ago in nationalist poets and so on. Just look at modern poetry, how many of them, from Yeats to Ezra Pound and so on, were fascists. So again, since we are minimally decent people, we need poetry or national mythology to make us ready to do horrible things. Again, the horror of today's wars is that they express something that we no longer can call, as when I was young, apropos Vietnam War, the military-industrial complex, but I think we should call it the poetic-military complex. The army doing the work outlined by poets and thinkers. And it's the case today in Russia. You cannot understand Putin without Russian nationalist artists doing propaganda for him, convincing Russians that they have a special mission, or without his court philosophers like Alexander Dugin, who claim there is a special Russian truth opposed to European truth, and that only war can decide. So we are in a very difficult situation. Both obvious solutions, that is to say, poetry thinking, but also its opposite, brutal pragmatism, they don't work. And I think this is why a true revolution is needed. Not the old communist revolution, but we have to change the basic paradigms of how we perceive reality. In 20th century, we tried to change the world too quickly, too much. Now we have to step back and interpret, understand our world in a different way. Thank you. Today we conclude with a topic which unfortunately is on all our minds: war again. So what has the ongoing war in Ukraine to do with freedom? I think that ultimately this is some kind of metaphysical war, in the sense that it's not just a war about controlling territory, exercise of power. It is ultimately a war between different notions of not freedom but liberty. Who is Putin here? I don't underestimate Putin. He's not just a paranoiac maniac who wants to occupy all of Europe. He is supported by a well-elaborated metaphysical vision. And I oppose Putin already at this philosophical level. I don't know how many of those who follow me now, how many of you did notice a very important detail. When Putin announced military intervention in Ukraine, he mentioned critically only one name: Lenin. He said, you remember, Ukraine was a Bolshevik invention. It doesn't exist as a nation, and so on, and so on. So, for all those leftists who still think, nonetheless, the great enemy today is American imperialism, so even if Putin is not exactly a model of democracy, he opposes the greatest threat, NATO and United States, so we can be his allies. If you think like this, this should ruin your last illusions. Putin is simply a dangerous national conservative who is thinking in what terms? Remember, many people don't know this, which is liberty provided by a safe network of authoritarian power. it's interesting to know who is Putin's official philosopher. It's Ivan Ilyin, a conservative Russian theologist from 1920s. He escaped Soviet Union, and then he developed something that he directly called a new Russian fascism, which was an authoritarian patriarchal order. Ilyin said, "We only vote in order to affirm our collective support for our leader." Isn't this incidentally how elections effectively work now in Russia? So no wonder Ilyin is really the official philosopher now. Do you know that I heard from Russian friends, his books are now reprinted in hundreds of thousands of copies by the state. Every military conscript is given them, every state administrator is given his books, and so on and so on. Then, the present court philosopher of Putin, Alexander Dugin, follows this line, but with a postmodern spin of historicist relativism. A quote, you have to hear it to believe it, that it's true. I'm quoting Alexander Dugin. Postmodernity shows that every so-called truth is a matter of believing. So we believe in what we do, we believe in what we say. And that is the only way to define the truth. So we have our special Russian truth that you need to accept. If the United States does not want to start a war, you should recognize that the United States is not anymore a unique master. This is the question of who rules the world. Only war could decide really. That's Putin's official philosopher. So what's important to note here is that when Dugin says we have our own truth and so on, he reduces this truth nonetheless to a couple of big spheres. Like we can ask, what about Ukrainian truth? What about Syrian truth? No, they don't care, Russians, about them. Another Russian state philosopher, Efraimov, Dmitry, said brutally, in the next couple of decades, the world will be changed into 4 great spheres of influence: American, Russian, Chinese, and Indian. All other sovereign states will disappear. They will maybe continue to exist formally, but they will be subordinated to this. This is the vision which you should bear in mind, which is no longer the vision of war as a war between nation states. No. This is why I think within their view of the world, Russia is right to claim that their attack on Ukraine is not a war. For them, war would have been the direct war between Russia and NATO or United States. But they are now just on a peacekeeping mission within what they consider their sphere of influence. Why is this situation so tragic? Because if anything is clear, it is that we, all of us, global capitalist order, we are at a moment of crisis. I would be even a little bit critical, not of Ukrainian heroic resistance to Russia, but of how they sometimes ideologically formulate it. Their formula is, we are defending Europe. European civilization. My God, my reaction is, if they say this, are they not aware that they are already speaking Putin's and Dugin's language? As if there is a European-American sphere and Russian sphere, and we defend our sphere. No, I think that the battle going on in Ukraine is a universal global battle. It's a battle for what the new world order will be. I almost have a nostalgia for the Cold War, which was Cold War, in the sense that it was war, but it was cold, kept cold by fixed rules that all sides obeyed. Now, we don't have yet new rules. Big powers are making experiments. Of course, experiments at the expense of smaller nations. What the new rules will be. And the madness is this one. Exactly in the situation which is today's, where our very existence is under threat. First, we have global warming. One cannot even imagine how we will all be affected 10, 20 years from now. We will have other pandemics. We have social problems even in developed countries. At this point, war returned. War which precisely prevents what we need, a global cooperation to deal with global warming. Just think what is clearly happening. Even if there will be no further big wars, if a compromise will be found in Ukraine, there will be refugees because of global warming. New deserts are forming, and so on and so on. So where will millions of people go? In the old time, this was decided by wars. Today, because many states have atomic weapons, chemical weapons, and so on, we cannot afford this. Cooperation is a matter of survival. So let me give you an interpretation of what is going on today. I think that the mistake of Ukrainians who think they are defending Europe is that they don't see that what they call Europe, the European civilization, is in itself in a deep crisis. Remember protests like Yellow Vests in France, Podemos in Spain and other places. These were not protests which articulated a desire to be more European. These were signs of a crisis of the existing European civilization itself. I think that if, or let's hope when, Ukraine wins, then they will confront the real problem, which is what kind of Europe do they want to join? Do they want this new fundamentalist Europe, neoconservative Europe, which excludes immigrants and so on, or do they want what really is the best in Europe? Feminism, human rights, social democratic tradition, welfare state, and so on and so on. So again, now I come to my really, please listen to this really crucial point. The tragedy of the ongoing war is for me that it's not the moment of truth, in the sense of now we were fighting wrong battles, who cares today about feminism, global warming, all this is forgotten, now we have the real conflict there, Europe or Russia. No, this war is in some sense the deepest lie, because true long-term problems disappeared. You know where you can feel this or see this clearly? Something which really made me sad happened recently among European conservatives. Till now, they had some understanding for Putin. Some of them even said, yeah, we understand Putin, he has his own right on his side. As you probably remember, Donald Trump openly first praised Putin. But now, even the extreme right in Europe militarized itself, but with an implicit argumentation, which I find terrifying. The logic is this one. This war finally enables us to get rid of all the pseudo-problems. Global warming, sexual oppression, feminism, and so on. Now the situation is real war. Neoconservatives follow Dugin and European conservatives for whom war is the only true ethical moment. In war, you make the basic choice, you do what is needed to do. And it's incredible how neoconservatives celebrate what is going on in Ukraine now, where they claim the proper sexual difference is again established. They say, forget about transgender and so on. Now, sexual roles are again affirmed. Women escape Ukraine with children to do in safety their proper job, which is, of course, raising children and so on, while men even return to Ukraine fighting. This is the real conflict. And that's, for me, again, the tragedy of this war. Exactly the wrong interpretation is prevailing. Against this, we should, I think, adopt some very sad insight. The first one is that, again, this is not just a war between Russia and the West or whatever. This is a war for a new world order. What will be the new world order? And the Russian project is clear. That's why they don't even call the attack on Ukraine war. For them, this is limited intervention into their own sphere. What they want is global peace, but peace in the sense in which each country, big country, is allowed to maintain peace within its sphere of influence to what the Russians call peaceful, limited military operation. The vision of Russia is that. Why? This is what Putin says again and again. I don't get it. Why doesn't life go on? Putin is all the time saying we still deliver oil to the West. Their vision is, as I call it, not Cold War, but hot peace. Global peace where there are always local wars here and there which maintain peace. And this, I think, is the catastrophe that we should avoid at any point. Something like new non-alignment is needed. By this, I mean we should not just say we protect the European way of life in Ukraine. No, our struggle there, when we support Ukraine, is a global struggle. A global struggle for a certain notion of liberty, which includes, again, welfare state, feminist human rights, feminism, human rights, and all that is progressive in European legacy. What Russia and China, unfortunately, more and more stand for, including some European conservatives who join them, is a type of multiculturalism which is very dangerous, which is peaceful coexistence of, as they say, different ways of life. The message of Putin repeatedly to the West is, let's coexist. You have countries where you do your own stupidities. You allow gay marriages and so on, all that. There are other countries, Arab countries, where you can do clitoridectomy, beat women, whatever. Why don't we all peacefully exist together? So it's a version of global market, but between countries, each of which has its own way of life. I think the new non-alignment should mean non-alignment in the sense that we are not aligned to a specific way of life. I don't like when Ukrainians are saying, but we belong to you, we are white people like you should support us. No, I don't care about that. White Europeans also can do horrible things. Should we forget that Nazism was done by Germans, by the nation which embodies the highest European culture? So, I'm for globalism, for universal struggle, but again, the universalism, which is universalism of a shared struggle. We should not isolate Russia today. We should establish all connections possible with maybe the true heroes of this war. Russians who risk their lives and dare to protest in all possible way against Putin's war. And we should do the same in our own countries. This is the solidarity we should strive for. So I think that that's crucial to say. Our message to Russians who protest against the war in Ukraine is not, oh, thanks that you are not patriots, you are universalists. No, they are the true patriots. A true patriot, that's for me the best definition I can imagine. A true patriot, the one who truly loves his country, is a person who is ashamed of his own countries when his country is doing something wrong. That's the difficult thing to do today. I think that there is no more disgusting slogan than the well-known saying, my country, right or wrong. If you say this, you are not a true patriot. And now, to conclude, I'm coming back to freedom. The first act of freedom is to be able to resist your own country when it goes wrong. That's why patriotism and freedom are not opposed. If patriotism is a true patriotism. For example, my Israeli friends they oppose terrorism, but they understand the difficult plight of Palestinians in the West Bank. They are, for me, the true inheritors of the great Jewish legacy. That's what we should be able to do. This is where true patriotism is not opposed to internationalism. You can be a true patriot and an internationalist. And if you are ready to be ashamed of your own country, this is the first step towards freedom today. Today, you cannot be really free without being at least a little bit ashamed of your own country. Thank you very much for your patience, for watching The Great Minds, and although I have some doubts if I am really among the great minds, I hope at least that I perplexed you a little bit. I didn't want to bring you clear answers so that you can say, okay, now we know it, let's go to sleep. I want to disorient you, to make you think. If I succeeded in this, even if you don't agree with me, I think I achieved what I wanted. So it was an honor for me. Thank you very much.